Hi everybody, today I'll be reviewing this Civivi Appalachian Drifter. I recently made a video comparing this knife to two other flip joints, as in knives that flip but are also slip joints, non-locking knives, and if you've seen that video comparing these three, the CRKT Symmetry, the Monterey Bay Slayback and the Civivi Appalachian Drifter, then there won't be much new information here. But if you haven't seen that video and you're only interested in the Appalachian Drifter, then hopefully this video will be helpful for you. Before I get started the actual review, I want to say that if you're in a country where there is no restrictions on carrying a knife that has a lock, I highly recommend that you do that, as they are far safer tools. This is the Civivi McKenna with the Damascus blade as well, quite similar size wise and material wise to the Appalachian Drifter, but it is a locking knife and a far safer knife, and I would recommend you go for one of them over the Drifter, or indeed over any non-locking knife. Here is a Kershaw Atmos, which is another locking alternative. Now we'll start off with size comparisons, and actually I'll just put the Atmos back in here and we'll put Kershaw bare knuckle at the top there. So the Civivi Appalachian Drifter has an overall length of 6.875 inches and a blade length of 3 inches, which is very typical, as that is a legal line here and it's a legal line in a few other places as well. So some other UK legal carries, of course, follow along similar sizes. Here's a Spyderco UK PK and a Hinderer XM Slippy. You can see that they're all in and around the same size, and we'll also do, there's a CRKT Pillar Heine Haynes edition and a Spyderco PM2. So not a large knife, but the size you'd expect for a non-locking UK legal carry knife. It weighs 2.48 ounces, which is certainly not heavy, and is under an ounce an inch, so no complaints there. So we'll start with deployment. This knife has a double detent style action, and it is running on bearings, which is how most Civivis are. As in, most Civivis run on bearings, most Civivis are not double detent, most Civivis are locking knives. This Civivi has a very minimal flipper tab. You'll see here it is a very compact flipper tab, and that means you don't have something big sticking out the back of your knife in your pocket for your hand to hit. So that's very good in the pocket. Often they don't work as well as flipper tabs, but this one is really rather good. The action is fantastic. Certainly a lot better in action than the likes of the CRKT Symmetry, which it was compared against in my earlier video. The fuller is wonderful on this knife as well, because it gives you somewhere for your thumb to grip, so you can actually slow roll this knife very easily. And in a UK legal carry knife, in that sort of environment, being able to open a knife slowly if you're around people who might be scared of something like that can definitely be an advantage. So I'm very happy with that, and I think you can middle flick it as well. Yeah, first try this time. So yes, I'm a big fan of the fuller on this knife. Now this knife has a light blade, and it has, as I mentioned, a double detent system. So it has a detent ball pushing on each side of the blade. Now that means that this knife will probably never drop shut, or at least it's certainly very unlikely that this knife will get to the point where it drops shut. That's just inherent in double detent style actions, or at least double detent style actions which are actually using two separate detent balls, one on each side of the blade. The Monterey Bay Slayback is far smoother on the close, but it is only using a single detent. Now, because the open position detent is stronger, which is a benefit you get from having a detent on each side of the blade, is you can have only one engaged and then have two engaged later. So if you get some light underneath this, you might be able to see. So you can see just here, there's contact on the blade on both sides. That is both detent balls into the open position detent hole. Now if I close this knife, what we'll be able to see is, yeah, they're both still there, but you can see the gap between the ball and between the detent bar and the blade now. So neither of the balls are completely into the detent hole, which gives you a far softer detent for opening the knife than you have once the knife is open, which is really quite good. It gives you a sort of finer tuned detent, where something like the Slayback, the detent is a little stiff to open and a little easy to close because it's one detent bar and it's the same detent system. So here they've managed to be able to kind of customize the open and closed position detent separately instead of having one detent for both the open and closed position. So that works really pretty well. It does mean that this has a fairly strong detent for a flip joint style knife. For a double detent style knife, it is fairly firm. It's not especially firm, but even though I've tightened up the detent on my Heine Haynes pillar, it's still not as stiff as the Appalachian Drifter, I wouldn't say. And because of that, this knife will pop shut very easy. When you push high up on the blade, you can quite consistently get it to pop closed. I'm not doing a very good job of it at the moment. There we go. But with a little bit of practice, you can absolutely get it to pop shut consistently, which is quite nice as well. So, the Civivi does have quite a strong detent, but unfortunately there is no other way to hold the knife open. So if that detent fails, there is nothing to stop the blade closing on your fingers. Something like the UK PK, you've got a big finger choil here, so even if the back spring does give up and the knife starts to close, your finger's holding that open. Something like the Slayback, you've got this piece here, so as the knife blade starts to close, your fingers hold it in there so it doesn't shut on your fingers. There is nothing like that on the Appalachian Drifter, which I think is its biggest flaw, and unfortunately makes this knife feel a little bit less safe than its competitors. But there's more on that in the comparison video that I made earlier if you want to hear more about that. So this Civivi is available in many different versions, a lot of them plain G10s like greens and coyote and that kind of thing. So a lot of different colours, a lot of different versions available. This particular one is the Damascus, and the scales are a mix of carbon and grey G10, which I really dislike. I wish they'd just gone for pure carbon. I don't know what they think they're adding mixing in grey G10. To me it just looks weird. You don't get to see much of the light of the carbon, much of the carbon catching different angles of light and things, because it's mixed in with the grey G10, which is just always flat. For me, maybe if they'd put in a brighter colour of G10, that might have been a bit more interesting, but to me this kind of just looks like less pleasant version of carbon fibre. There's the raindrop carbon on the Monterey Bay Slayback, and you can see that that kind of is a lot more interesting in the light really. So I'm not a big fan of that. I do like the bolster style though. I like these machine grooves that make it kind of give you a kind of fake bolster look. I quite like that. Personally, I would have preferred the version of this which is in green micarta and has an S35VN blade. That's quite a big functional improvement in terms of blade steel. If that had been available, I would have gone for one of those. But it would still share a lot of the flaws that this knife has at the moment. So, build quality. As you'd expect from Civivi, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the build quality here. There is no horizontal play to speak of at all. The centering is excellent. It is very, very well made, very, very smooth. No sharp edges or anything like that. Very, very nicely made. Which is, again, just what we expect from Civivi now. Disassembly is also fairly easy for this knife. It is mostly T6 screws, which is a bit of a shame. It does have a T8 pivot. And there's a few more steps involved than you might think. But if you I would recommend you start from the back, take out this pivot screw, take out the clip screws, lift it off, and then just keep working your way down and rebuild the reverse of how you took it apart. Then I don't think you'll have any problems. There's nothing to make this disassembly particularly difficult. Now, it carries very, very well. It has a deep carry clip, it has a rounded off end, and because of the angle of the clip, it's going to hide towards the back of your pocket pretty well. Same way that the bare knuckle does. I talked about it a fair bit in my bare knuckle review. If you put these clips straight, you see the knives kind of curve off to the side, where something like the Slayback hangs very straight. So that helps the knife hide in the back of your pocket, and it's going to make the knife carry a little bit better. So this knife carries very, very well. However, the clip itself, I'm not a fan of. To me, I think it's very ugly, to be honest. On a very kind of classy knife like this, I think it's a very, very basic and cheap looking clip. And it can't be reversed, which is a bit of a shame, I think, as well, because this knife would be completely the same for left and right-handed people if the clip was able to go on the other side. Now, I know that it's at an angle, so I know they would need to give a second clip, but a lot of companies do that, and I know you would have a little patch here, but again, a lot of companies do that as well. I'm sure they could have redesigned it another way, like had the clip attached to the flat end where you wouldn't have had to put a machined in area here, that kind of thing. But the clip in the pocket is very good. The clip base and screws have been recessed into the handle, so it slides in and out very nicely. Unfortunately, it does give me some hot spots in my hand a little bit. It's not a disaster, but I can definitely feel kind of the tip here and the back corners of this clip. Now, a lot of the time with knives like this that are designed for very, very thin, slicey knives, designed for kind of precise tasks, that kind of thing, a lot of the time you're not going to be cutting for a huge amount of time. So the fact that this knife is better in the pocket than in your hand might actually work quite well for your use case. But that's something that only you really know. Now onto the blade. The Appalachian Drifter is by far the thinnest tipped knife I have ever owned. It is unbelievably thin. If I bring in something else which is quite thin for a comparison, here's Spyderco UKPK, which is quite a thin knife. And look at that, look how much thinner the Civivi is. It is an unbelievably thin tipped knife, and thin behind the edge of course as well. Now the result is that this knife cuts fantastically. It slides through material with very, very little resistance at all. The downside is you've got a very, very fragile tip, and you need to be extremely careful with that. I believe Civivi's Damascus is based on 9CR. I think it's actually a 9CR and 10CR mix, so it should be a decent steel. It should hold an edge fine and things, but no matter how good the steel, that tip is always going to be fragile being that thin. This is definitely not a knife you want to be prying with. So you do have to be very, very careful of that. However, like I say, I do think the steel will perform pretty well. It's performed fine for me. It won't be the best performing steel that you'll encounter at this price point, but the fact that they're offering a Damascus style blade at this price is very unusual, and it is a very competitive price for something like that. So a Damascus type blade that still functions well, maybe not as well as some steels that you could find for this price, but still functions well in a knife at this price, is really very good, very good. And once again, I love the style here. I do love the look of the fuller and the clip point as well. Coupled with the Damascus blade, it is a brilliant, brilliant looking blade, and I also love that there is no writing on it whatsoever. It's a bit like the Slayback blade. However, the Slayback does have an MBK logo on the back. Not that that bothers me, but it is nice that it is a completely unmarked blade. So I think this knife would work brilliantly when paired with a harder use knife. If you were to carry, say, these two, then you've got a knife to do kind of general utility stuff with, and you've also got a very sharp, thin, slicey knife to do precision tasks with. These two together would be an absolutely excellent pairing. However, if you're going to carry and use the Appalachian Drifter on its own as your kind of only carry knife, I'm sure it'll work fine, but you need to be very careful that you don't catch the back of the blade, because as we've seen, it will pop closed, and there's nothing to stop it popping closed on your fingers. So you've got to be very careful with that, and you've got to be very careful of the thinness of the blade and that you don't damage that tip. Ergonomically, I find the curve here just a little bit too much. It starts to kind of bunch up my last two fingers a little bit. And again, not a big deal, but it isn't ideal for me. And like I've already mentioned, the pocket clip I also don't really like. So it's very far from being the worst, but it is also not the best. It's not my favourite knife ergonomically, but again, not the worst. Now this model of the Drifter costs around £100, which is a good price for the materials and build quality that you're getting here. Like also Civivis, you also get some extras like a nice zip up case. Civivi are very good at going the extra mile for really quite low prices. When you think about something like a Hinderer XM18, which is 3 or 4 times the cost of this knife, actually a bit more than 4 times the cost of this knife, and you don't get a pouch, you just get it in a box. It's nice that they're doing the extra mile. It also helps it feel like a more expensive product, and it looks like a more expensive product, so I do think that it is quite good value for money. However, As we've talked about, the clip having some hotspot issues and it not being the safest knife in the world, if I could save up a bit extra and go for either the EWC or the slayback, I would choose to go that route. So the Civivi might be the best choice for you if you want an ultra slicey second knife, but I'd be worried about the durability of the tip and more importantly the safety of my fingers using it as an EDC. As a result, if I had to spend £100 on a UK legal carry, I'd probably still opt for a Spyderco UK PK, which you can usually get for around £30 cheaper, and in my opinion is a far better user. It's more ergonomic, get a better grip on it, it's safer, that kind of thing. However, it is also less slicey, more ugly, and worse in the pocket. So you know yourself what your priorities are in a knife, and this might match up very nicely with them. But if saving up is an option, very seriously consider one of the MBKs. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.